guys, you're listening to Metal Matters, a weekly Gimme Radio podcast. I'm your host, Mike Hill. If you like metal, punk, hardcore, or anything extreme, you've come to the right place. So subscribe and never miss out. I hope everyone's doing well in the midst of this global pandemic. I'll be coming to you guys every week without fail, providing entertainment to help us through these troubling times. This week, we have my good friend Valnoir of Metastazi, this amazing design company. You've seen his work on the covers of Watain Records, Blut Aud Nord, Tombs, and others. He's a great guy, very interesting person. Was there in the beginning of a lot of the French black metal scene, so he's got a lot of insights into that. In addition to all of that, he has a great book called Analogue Black Terror, which is this exhaustive tome collecting obscure and not so obscure demo covers. So here we go. How has this global pandemic been affecting you?
Oh, well, I must say it like I'm a bit always hiding in my hole and working from home. My social life is not super developed. And also I have my girlfriend who just arrived from Russia. Just arrived. She arrived like one of the last planes available.
Oh, wow.
So we work together. So we're basically quite going through this experience so far quite in a quite comfortable and cozy way, I must say. We don't have much to complain about for the moment. We will see how this will treat you in like 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. But for the moment, it's the street of Paris looks like Pyongyang in North Korea now because you have so few cars.
Mm-hmm.
So that's quite entertaining. But yeah, we tried, to be good kids and to be quite self-disciplined and to avoid breaking the law and going to see some friends and partying. For the moment, we just try to stay safe home. And yeah, that's it. That's weird. We'll see how it develops. We are all the same. It's the same. Like in New York, you're not in quarantine yet, right?
Not yet, but there's always been these rumblings about things being locked down, quote unquote. And but right now, everyone's working at home, and I haven't left the house or the apartment in over 24 hours. So more than that, actually, more like 30 hours. It's okay. I could work from home. I have stuff around me, it's not too bad. Food, things like that. So I'm getting by,
Well, where you live? You live in Brooklyn?
Brooklyn, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, this is going to be a rough patch for all of us, I think. So get ready because that's weird, like we are only allowed to get outside twice a day just to go like for groceries, or beside this we need like specific authorization, for like derogations if you want to do something else. And we have cops in the street. We haven't been controlled yet, and the streets are still quite crowded because people don't take their car anymore, so they walk, But that's getting weirder and weirder. So yeah.
Yeah, I always tend to my mind goes into these more conspiratorial avenues when stuff like this happens. Or this is the first time anything like this has really happened, but I'm always predisposed to think about conspiracies and control and the government and all these other, sort of ideas about how people are complying. And I understand it's a health issue and all this other stuff, but I also have, there's nagging doubts as to what's really going on here. And I just don't want to go down that rabbit hole just yet, but we'll see how it turns out.
Yeah, well, my point of view is that it's going to cost so much money to all the governments worldwide, is that I have really difficulties to figure how this could benefit anyone in power right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So, onward.
So well.
The Metastazi, when you go to your website, there's a very bold statement, which I think can be intimidating to some people, but also to people like myself. When I see that statement, it makes me feel that this is someone that I'd want to work with because they're about actually doing something creative without any kind of limitations. And so, yeah, I mean, what that intention is, that to kind of scare away, people who aren't serious about their work, or what's the intention behind that?
Well, yeah. First, it came out. It was in the very first place when I did that like 12 years ago or something. It was a pure emotional reaction to a couple of commissioned work that went really bad because of some clients wanted to interact too much in my work in a quite bad and an effective manner, and also while disrespecting my point of view, it was also lowering the global aspect of what I was doing. So in the first place, it was quite a very emotional reaction, brutal emotional reaction. Then I kept it because it was actually quite effective. Well, scaring people away, I just think it just filters people with whom I would have never wanted to work with in the first place. So maybe I lost some opportunities to work with big bands. I don't know. I have no idea. But if that's the case, that probably means that it will not have worked anyway in the first place. And then people like a lot of people are coming to me because they actually like it reflects their own state of mind when things come to creativity, and therefore feel quite comfortable in working within those walls. Also, it's a very aggressive statement, but actually, and you know that because I mean we have been working together also with Tooms. I'm not that radical when I'm in front of like smart enough people and with whom I can discuss, people with taste, people with understanding of things. So I am not in real life, in practice, I'm not that radical, because as soon as people has accepted the statement anyway, that means that we can talk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But there is no way I'm going to take that site this text away from my side, because I mean it did good so far. So fuck it. And it proved that I could still make my money and work and have like a decent living with those walls around me. So why taking them off now? That would be ludicrous. So yeah.
Yeah, when I read that, I was like, this is pretty much exactly the type of person I'd want to work with, and I think it's been good so far.
Yeah.
And if you go if you go through the portfolio of work that's shown on the site, I mean, you've worked with Behemoth, Watain, big names as far as I'm concerned, and also outside of that, you've also done quite a bit of work with even bigger artists like Laibach and I don't think that statement has stood in your way, stood in progress for you. I mean, you've definitely put together a very unique and kind of prolific set of work. So I don't think I think it's helped actually.
Well, this is something I told to a lot of designers who came to me and telling me, well, we love your manifesto, but I love your manifesto, but I cannot afford to adopt a similar strategy because it will harm my business. And it will frighten away a lot of customers. But this is what I answer is like, man, listen, I did it and I still work. And I work for big names, as you said. I work for like good clients, and it's all good. So sometimes you got disappointed by how to turn it, by your own expectations, including expectation of wait. I try to figure things in my mind. Well, anyway, I mean, it just works better than what people should think. So that also means that people should try a bit more, to have a bit more courage, because sometimes it just works, So
yeah, definitely. And your actual work, like the actual content of your work, I can see that there's a lot of there's, in my mind, there's a difference between a graphic artist and a designer, and your work kind of combines like both aspects of that. And were you first the designer, or like a graphic artist? Like, did you, what was your evolution as an artist?
No, well, my studies background is graphic design. This is what I did,
Yeah.
like communication design,
Okay.
mostly directed towards advertising. But I've always been working with both elements in parallel, not even conscious that those things were dissociated. For me, it was just part of the same body, like two legs of the same body. It's like a long time after that I realized that those were two different fields of work, at least according to a lot of people. And you can be a very good illustrator and being very very bad with typography, and you can also be like a very good to lay out and design books in a very elegant way, and being not able to draw shit. But that probably comes from the fact that when I was a kid, I wanted to be a comic artist,
Oh
comic
yeah.
designer, and also I wanted to be like a car designer, and all those things evolved in this weird way. And also I had to find some studies in which I could, like blossom, but also that would also provide money for me to make a living. So I just ended up like growing both elements more or less in parallel at the same time. And
Yeah.
I think this is also why I'm still not, maybe not thriving, but it still works for me, is because I can provide two types of, like several types of services to bands and labels and promoters, and this is why I attract them, I think.
So music, a lot of people know you from your art, but you have several different projects you've done over the years. So when did music and art kind of come together for you?
Well, I soon enough I figured out that I wanted to be active. Wait, once again, that I wanted to be active professionally, and like to give my life not only to music but mostly to black metal, at least when I was younger. It was like very very specific. And well, soon enough I also realized that it was basically much more complicated to build a career and isolate myself in art. It was much more difficult to isolate myself in art if I was like being a music practitioner than to be like a graphic artist. So at some point, like my let's so-called music career just took the back seat. And like, I mean, it yourself, you're a musician yourself. Like, being a musician just demands just like tremendous sacrifices. You have to sacrifice everything to music, like your family, your job, your everything, for very often, most of the time, very mediocre and disappointing feedbacks, and outcomes, to the point that it's just very discouraging, and you end up like dropping the ball. So and in the meantime, like being like a graphic designer and a visual artist in the exact same field and creative universe allows me to keep on doing what I like and not being discouraged by weak, like very very low outcomes. So this is why I made this choice. As a musician, I always have like a couple of projects on the side, long-term projects, but I'm really not define me as an active musician. Um, so yeah, it's my priority has always been like creating images much more than making music. It's not the same emotion though that you feel when you make an image and when you are like headbanging on stage, on some riff that truly like put you in a trance. It's not the same. It doesn't manifest the same way on your spirits. But in the end of the day, I have really no frustration of having not developed that much the musical aspect of the creative spectrum of my activities. But yeah, as I said, I always have a few things, like in the background on the run, and yeah, I'm working on a few stuff right now.
Yeah, I mean, in mankind's evolution, the two things are almost, they're mirror images of each other in some ways. I mean, even that primitive man, music, dancing, movement, graphics like cave paintings, all that sort of stuff has always been very, very, very close to mankind, expressing himself. And, to this day, I still feel like that's something like that's why like I always think that the graphic expression of music, be it or an album cover or t-shirts or any kind of imagery, has to be closely tied to the intention of the music, and that's the two things are very, very closely related in my mind.
Well, as I always, well, not always, but like for a long time, saw things that I believe in the concept of Gesamtkunstwerk, that is the total piece of the global and total piece of art, work of art. That means that when someone approaches creation, it should envision all the facets of the prism. Like the music is one thing, but it cannot go without image. It cannot go with like a lot of those different, it's just like the different members, like organs of one same full body. And like bands should always give as much value to their music as they should give to the visual, and they should give to the lyrics, and they should give like all those aspects. So yeah, it's for me, like being an artist is not focusing. I mean, it's not a rule. It's just my point of view. But I think that it's important for an artist to consider all the different mediums and aspects of one idea, to give this idea maximum impact and maximum emotional reach, I think.
Yeah. So what drew you into black metal? Because these days black metal is I'm not going to say commercial, but it's way more accessible than it was, like say in the 90s or even 2000, 2001. So what about the music drew you into it?
Well, what happened is that I started to listen to metal when I was like 11, 12 years old, like in 92, something like this. And I very, very fast, I've been attracted by radical stuff very, very, very quickly, like something more extreme than what I already had with like Maiden or Iron Maiden or even Slayer. So I was like quite fastly attracted to death metal, and also quickly disappointed because it was not delivering a message, like an actual message that was as sincere, that was sincere. And it was just like a bunch of kids playing around, just like watching horror movies, and that was it. And I wanted something more serious. So I discovered, like in 93, I heard the name of Mayhem for the first time, but it was very difficult to put my hands on the record because the distribution was so weak, especially because I was a kid and I had absolutely no network. So and I heard like about Mayhem, and I heard like, of course, like of all the, like all the facts surrounding Mayhem, like the murders, church arsons, and etc., etc. So this immediately attracted me. And in 1994, I bought my first record, and it like totally like swallowed me as a whole human being. And this was like total revolution in my life, and it still has a huge impact on me. Although like I was a teenager back then, and you take things in a very different way when you are 15 years old and when you are 40 years old. Radicalism evolved in something that like, I mean, when I see what's happening those weeks, it's hard for me anymore like to really praise for the end of mankind, because this is more or less what's happening now. Not the end of mankind, but we are facing a pandemic, and that is one of the thematics that are always been praised in black metal. And when the shit actually happens, you get a bit of cold feet.
Right.
But yeah, the thing also what attracted me in black metal was its like pure radicalism, and the fact that those guys were not talking about destruction, but actually destroying things and lives and act of terrorism and these kind of things. But yeah, quite quickly, black metal got as soon as those bands started to have to reach a wider audience and to have success, it immediately like watered down uh, this radicality and being like a very disappointing betrayal to people who were actually still looking forward like the bitter fruits of evil in black metal. So this is when this is when in the late 90s appeared like this so-called orthodox scene with bands like Deathspell Omega and Watain, basically all the bands revolving around Norma Evangelium Diaboli, who wanted to take back radicalism in black metal from those bands who all have been like most of them huge disappointment and keep on disappointing actually like in 2020 because it's getting worse. The circus is getting worse and worse and worse and worse to the point that I even myself sometimes wonder if it's still worth fighting for anything within the black metal sphere. But well, I'm trapped, so I have to deal with it now. So yeah, that's my more or less like very in a nutshell my path within black metal, like panning on 25 years. I mean, I could talk about that for 2 hours, but
Is
that's not the idea now.
in France, is there like a very Christian vibe? I mean, I've been to France many times, but it's always been, around people like you and me that, I experience the city. But, for example, like in Norway, there was a very Christian sort of environment that those bands, sort of developed in. So is there a similar thing in France, or is France like way more? I know there's a lot of different types of people that live in France too. So.
Well, the first thing is that we are Catholics and Scandinavian people are Protestant, like Lutherans. And yes, there is on one hand in Scandinavia an aspect of the society that is super progressive, and another aspect that is super conservative. And while like Lutheranism appeared, it was here to create a reform and to make things more modern and more like basically a bit more functional for society. It also became something with years that created its own new conservatism that you face a lot in the US, for example, and that also exists in Scandinavia. As far as France is concerned, the religion is castrated here. Like Catholicism still exists, but basically churches are mostly like filled at 20% on Sundays, and like those 20% are composed in 90% of retired, if not dying people. Let alone mentally challenged kids and like inbreed consanguinity, like bourgeois family. It's I mean, there is really nothing left to be frightened of with religion in France. I mean, when things come to Christianity, of course, then you have the rise of other communitarism and other religious radicalism, just like Islam. But this is another totally different problem. As far as like traditional religion is concerned in France, there is it's just like the ghost of something that used to exist, but no one gives a shit anymore about that in France. So I'm quite happy about that. It's quite it's a natural but logical evolution, I think.
Yeah, because I think that was one of the main things that fascinated me about black metal back, when I was discovering it. I mean, even earlier than that, things like Slayer and their, even though that turned out not, even though one of the guys in Slayer turned out to be Catholic, the satanic imagery and the anti-Christian sentiments were something that even at an early age I really responded to that, because I saw just the oppression of the just monotheistic religion in general, be it Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and also with those three religions, how the earlier versions, like, there's like esoteric Christianity, like there are things prior to the way that religion has been perverted by greed and control that actually I think are valid. Same things with Judaism, Kabbalah, like all that sort of stuff, and how those ideologies in and of themselves weren't necessarily bad things, but the human aspect of it perverted it into this controlling way of, just controlling peasants, basically people who aren't educated or creating armies of people who to do your bidding, basically, and that's
Yeah, it's just a mean of power. That's it. It was politics before politics. It's just, but like it's one thing to frighten people, to control them with like earthly laws, and control them with like the threat of internal damnation. I mean, this rings another bell that is much more frightening to people who are not intellectually equipped to understand that it is like a whole global pile of lies and bullshit. So yeah, this is why also religion developed so much. But well, I mean, it's not my job. I'm not a theologian, but
yeah,
this
stuff's interesting
whole
though.
yeah.
A couple weeks ago, your book arrived in my mail, and and I was like, it exceeded. I mean, I had already high expectations for it. I thought I'm like, I knew that it was going to be a incredibly well designed package, and but when it showed up, it was in this big box, and it was when I opened it, it was this tome. If that's the only word I can think to describe it, and I was like totally blown away by the care that went into putting that thing together, and yeah, so what motivated you to put that together? And of course, we're talking about Analogue Black Terror, which is still available for those of you out there who are interested in black metal demos and the artwork and graphics associated with that.
So well, what triggered the project it's quite simple. It's just a friend of mine who his father died, and he went back to the old basement of his old man and found like a couple of shoeboxes full of demos that were resting there for at least 15 years. Most demos from the mid and late 90s. I also had a couple, but I've never been that good to collect things when. To collect records and tapes, etc., etc. I collect other things, and so it arrived at my place with like all those old tapes that neither of us had seen in like 20 years. So it was like a quite strong emotional rush, And like my friend just said, like out of the blue, like, oh, we should make a book about that, and I just like took it very literally, and I started to scan those like 50 demos he had, and then I expanded to my close network, and then this network like expanded, and I ended up like having contributors, like worldwide contributors. But yeah, basically the idea was I wanted to like to create an archive of all those documents that are either hidden in some basements or just like simply lost, and that will be more and more hard to find with time going. And also there was nothing existing besides like this online demo museum website, but it's like not really up to date, very small images, and I wanted like to really give um, a response that had like scope, that was like um, like a super heavy object focused on the roots of black metal. That is for me again radicalism. This is what made black metal different from any other type of metal. It was like the commitment in radicalism. I could only compare that to maybe what happened in punk hardcore, or maybe hip hop, like gangsta hip hop. But yeah, my idea, I wanted like to breath like to blow life again into those very old and fantastic documents that incarnate for me like the purest essence of black metal before those bands were even signed on small labels. It was just like sincere and spontaneous rush of hatred and creativity. So yeah, I collected, I scanned a lot. I collected a lot of documents, like almost no, not 900, like 600 or 700, and I made like I basically like made a selection of 450 what were to me the most relevant documents. And after, what happened is that when I started to work on the project, I just contacted Yosuke Konishi from Nuclear Warner, because I knew that he had a wide collection himself, like a wide private collection of demo tapes and documents. And basically in 2 emails, I just like asked him, but would you be interested in release it? And like just answer, yeah, fuck yes, I'm doing that with you. As long as I was in charge of all the technical aspects, because like making a book is not releasing a record. It has like, it's technically speaking, it's a bit more complicated than just to release a digipack. So as soon as he was assured that I would be very willing to take the job in terms like of production and manufacturing, then he just like told me that he wanted to do that with me, and he was willing to put enough money in the manufacture of the book to make it look like what you had in hands. That is like a very heavy, big, wide format, nicely bounded book with a super nice paper and everything. So yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely. I can imagine just looking at it, you can tell that there's a lot of different technical aspects to putting a book together, and yeah, it looks great up on my shelf, and I spent a lot of time. It's something I go back to look at. You know, I find myself looking at it pretty often, checking out the different imagery, all the demos, and also those demo covers are scanned at 100% actual size too, right? I think.
Yeah, that was the idea. I wanted like I wanted at least all the demos to be, the smallest size was the actual scale 1, so people could have like the maximum feel and experience like as similar as possible with the with the original feeling of having the demos in hand. And then some of those that were more important or interesting to me just increased their size until like huge sizes, so you could see like all the details and all the defaults, the mistakes, everything like exploding in your face.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, in a couple of emails that you and I exchanged, you mentioned something of another book coming out too.
Yeah, I'm working on the second tome because I was quite in a hurry I was quite impatient to have this one, the first one coming together. So as soon as I had enough documents that were satisfying to me and that were also appealing to me and like finding an echo with me, I just did the book without really trying to search for missing elements that were also very important, but I could not find back then. I'm talking about like the demos of Hellhammer, of Venom, of Immortal, of Marduk, like of a shitload of bands. That's like a shitload of demos that are not in the first book and that should be in the first book. So because of all those holes that I felt that should be filled, I asked to Yosuke, because the book is selling quite well. I mean, it didn't get sold out in 1 month, of course, but it's still quite it's a decent success.
Yeah, definitely.
So because it was I had 300 copies and I sold those in 6 weeks, so that's quite good. And because he was happy with the outcome of the first one, he told me, yeah, sure, let's make a second one, no problem. So right now I'm in the middle of the process of collecting new documents, and I have like 400 so far. So I'm like kind of halfway to make like a solid second volume. I just found a couple of guys who are like insane what I would call proto black metal collectors, like those like necro trash band from the 80s with like those guys with bangs and aviator glasses and covered in spikes. Like bands you've never heard of with like insanely primitive artworks. It's very, very, very exciting. I just received like a lot of very exciting documents from bands that no one ever heard about besides those 2 guys. So it's very it's quite cool. So also I show a bit like the roots of like this period of time before, when black metal or even death metal were not called black metal or death metal. It was just like thrash or speed metal that was just more necro than the usual production. And like death metal was the name of a demo of Possessed, and black metal was the name of an album of Venom, and that was it. So those guys were already, some of those guys were already playing something that was very, very close to black metal without even knowing that it was black metal yet. So this is one part of this will be this part, like from the 80s, will be more important than in the first volume. And then also I'm collecting also more stuff from the 90s that were not in. So like, yeah, as I told, like promo tapes, demos from Marduk, Immortal, and even weirder documents. I will soon receive some, like the directions, the graphic direction that Varg sent to Misanthropy when he was to release the first cassette of Borzum, So it's just like a white piece of paper with the text handwritten on it and with an arrow pointing saying, I want this in Gothic fonts, basically, So, yeah, a few very weird and very unique documents will appear. I think it will be very, I mean, for the people who enjoy the first volume, they will definitely like the second volume.
Yeah, it sounds great, man. Like the more like primitive artwork is the stuff that I actually find the most interesting, really, in some ways.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And also, after I was talking with Christopher Rigg of Ulver recently about that, like saying that after 1995, basically, you have this period of time in which most of the band are just replicating and xeroxing ideas that were done before. It's like all the same corpse paint, all the same logos, all the same font, all the same everything. So you have like this wave, like low wave of just people, like while black metal was something that was breaking ground and creating a revolution in the first place, then very quickly it became extremely conservative. Like people, like the actors of this scene, became extremely conservative and didn't want to experiment anymore until the late 90s, in which like you had all these wave with Norma Evangelium Diabolic, Catharsis, Funeral Mist, Deathbell Omegas, Vest, all those bands that again came back with the idea that new ground should be broken and things should be shaken to start a new era of black metal. So yeah, the second volume will also follow this kind of wave, like things growing up in the 80s to reach a peak in 93 and 94, and then going down and then going up again in the late 90s to end up in 2000. I choose to so it will be like quite symmetric with the first volume. It will be more or less the same structure and panning through the same period of time, and it will stop again in 2000, because after 2000 it didn't really make any sense to make cassettes anymore. So people started to make like CDR, and also I want to stop in 2000 because, well, it's the new millennium, so it makes sense. It's a new era, new things coming up. So yeah,
it's a logical point to stop at. Speaking of experimentation, and I feel like a lot of the French bands were part of that evolution within black metal.
A lot of the what band? Sorry.
A lot of the French bands, like
French bands, yeah, okay.
Yeah, Blut Aud Nord comes to mind. Where I feel like the genre actually was pushed forward by a lot of those bands. Antaeus, like you mentioned, but that spell Omega. I mean that actually, I feel like those bands actually were the ones that kind of pushed things into the new millennium as far as like black metal goes.
Yeah, well, I think that if one thing would identify the French scene compared to the other scenes worldwide and in Europe, is that the French scene has always been, I'm not very objective, of course, but this is also like information I gathered around me, people from foreign countries giving me their insights about that, is that the French scene always had like a creative element in it. And also quite important element of insanity also, because, when you take bands like from Les Légions Noires or Peste Noire or even Zvest, or all those guys were like extremely, and some of them are still extremely radical and extreme in their way to approach black metal. and mixing this with a very, very creative aspect. Like also you have bands like Alcest
Yeah.
that are not quite far from black metal, but still totally come from a black metal background, and that also created a new sound. Death Metal Omega created a new sound, like a lot of those bands. So this is what I think, and of course like Blut Aud Nord. I mean, there are a lot of those weird bands, or even the Diapsyche, for example, from Paris, that is less known but not less fucked up. And so yeah, when you come from this background and then you explore other things, you think that people are just, while black metal should be an insanely uncontrolled creative power that should accept no borders, no boundaries, you realize that a lot of people are extremely trapped into codes when things come to black metal, and this is the very, very opposite of black metal should be, as far as I'm concerned. You should free your mind and have like an artist approach instead to have like a craftsman approach and just using recipes and applying recipes that existed before. One should, when making black metal, try to find his very own identity, his very own world, universe, and develop that, instead of like stealing, not stealing, but instead of like replicating what other people did and did better. So yeah, I think the French scene has always been slightly more fertile for this kind of bands than a lot of other scenes, I think.
One of the things that we've been experiencing here in the States in the last 4 or 5 years, probably as a result of our fascistic regime that's currently in place, is this backlash to black metal and sort of extreme music in general. I mean, to me, that seems like something that was very prevalent in Europe for many years, like with things like, I think, like Antifa, like, being offended by a lot of the black metal and the sort of imagery and some of the ideologies that were put forward in the music. So, I mean, how do you think all that stuff fits together?
Well, in the first place, like we never really had serious Antifa problems related to the black metal scene in Europe. As far as I'm concerned, it always has been much more connected with the industrial scene, like the neo folk, dark folk thing. Black metal, at least in France, has always been like under the radar of Antifas. Maybe probably a bit less in Germany, but still, as long as you are not an actual Nazi band, NSBM band, like, I don't know, like Gottmoon or all those bands that, like, well, yes, we are Nazi. We play in front of swastikas and Sig Heil, some of those bands exist. So those bands, of course, have some problem with the Antifas for, obvious reasons, because they are fascist and the other ones are anti-fascist. So, but beside those specific cases, I don't think that we ever had been much annoyed by those people in Europe in the black metal scene. What happens in the US is that exactly, it's like you have this backlash of like a totalitarian regime and facing like triggering totalitarian ideas coming from the other side of the spectre, but that are no less toxic, I think. And like thinking that black metal concerts are a tribune for Nazi frontmen, and that those are political meeting, is just total and pure idiocy. It's just that, just go to the concert and you will see by yourself that like trying to avoid those people to express, like to avoid like this scene to express itself in the way it wants to express itself, just how could I put it? it's just being a fucking fascist, yourself. You
Yeah,
are just being a
exactly.
fucking fascist. You are just behaving like fascists because there is something you don't understand. There is something that you don't know and that you don't understand. And because you are convinced that this is toxic, then this is toxic. And you decide that it should stop to exist because it doesn't fit with your own way of seeing things. This is no less than just pure totalitarian behaviors and ideology. And call it fascism, or you can call it, there are different different kind of totalitarianism. But yeah, you can call it fascism, you can call it like a Czechism, you can call it different names, but the in the end it's still the same shit. It's people like militants, political militants, who are like blinded by some principle, the principle they didn't even invent themselves, to just to attack freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And this is just like something that should be shot, because as an artist myself, those people are my enemies. And I'm very, very radical towards what should be done to those people.
The ironic thing is a number of years ago, right around the time a lot of this stuff started up, with bloggers and journalism and all this other stuff, I had to go to a Sigur Rós concert to write about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're a cool band. I'm not a
say Sigur Rós, I mean from Iceland, right?
Yeah, for the Icelandic band. Yeah,
okay.
And right around before I went to the show, I remember there was some big controversy about a black metal show in New York, and thinking that, wow, that's some of the most diverse crowds I've ever seen were at black metal shows, like as far as like culturally diverse. When I went to the Sigur Rós concert, it was literally all white people. It was like the only people of color that were working were the people that worked at the venue. And I was like, wow, what an ironic sort of situation here. We have like this black metal show being shut down for, lack of cultural sensitivity or whatever. And I'm at this show that's literally a homogenous sort of, it looked like a white power rally. You know what I mean? There was literally all white people there.
No, this is a very, 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 very good point. Like the first black metal gigs I attended to in New York, I was surprised to see like all those Mexican guys with Thor's hammers around the neck. What the fuck? This is very weird. This is very, very weird. And I met in New York like a lot of people like coming from any kind of like cultural background and ethnic background, being enthusiastic about that, and without even meeting any kind of hostility towards anyone. Maybe it's different when you go to buttfuck Pennsylvania or Midwest to attend like some black metal gigs. I don't know, but in New York, it never like struck me as being like white supremacist rallies, and quite pretty much the opposite. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, that's not to say that indefinitely in places like Ohio or Indiana, there's like the lone guy that shows up, who really adheres to those ideologies. But on the other end of the spectrum, like when I was like a younger person, in hardcore punk and, that sort of scene, you literally would have groups of white power skins show up to shows. They would come looking to bust heads, and that simply doesn't exist anymore as far as I can see. I mean, that was a real threat, like in the late 80s and the early 90s, and now it's.
But do you have actual like white power fascists left in New York City? I mean, it's a very, very unhealthy environment for those people. Like the city is full of Jews,
Yeah, definitely.
How can you be anti-Semitic in New York? I mean, you just want to shut your head, like to blow your brains out. It's horrible for Nazis to live in New York. I really pity those guys, if they still exist, I pity them.
It's there's a town in Pennsylvania called Allentown, Pennsylvania, and that was like a infamous hotbed for that kind of activity. And if you read, there's all these books out now, all these guys telling stories about the old days and whatever, and everyone has a story about going to Allentown, Pennsylvania. and about going there and there being riots and fights and all this crazy stuff. And that just reinforces the point I guess I'm trying to make is that was 20 or 30 years ago. Now you go to see Marduk and it really, there's nothing like that. You know what I mean? And I just think a lot of this stuff, like a lot of the things in our culture right now are made up. It's like this really abstract idea that people are almost willing into existence. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, who gives a fuck about those guys? That also brings up another idea about symbols and the use of symbols and things like that. And yeah, I know a lot of the work that you do, you use a lot of symbols or develop these sigils. And you know, how is there a process that you have, or do you use like are there certain cultural things that you find connections with the band? Because that's one of the things that drew me to your work originally. I mean, I know you did that. There's the Behemoth that's kind of triangle with the flames and all that sort of stuff, and yeah. So what do you have a process for that, or is just something that comes to you?
Well, the Behemoth Sigil was the content of the Behemoth Sigil was the idea of Nurgle. So I didn't really have anything to do with finding the idea behind it. I just gave it a shape, so to speak.
Okay.
But then it's when I work with a band, especially like band with like spiritual message, so to speak, or trying to have a spiritual message. Using symbols and sigils, it's always something very convenient to use because it can easily like look very good and carry a lot of power in it, visual power and spiritual power. I have different methods to create those. I quite often use the technique of Austin Osman Spare, like this guy in the 19th century, like late 19th, early 20th century, was like part of the OTO and who gave, like theories like to theorize, and he theorized in a very, very clear way how to make a sigil, what was the function of a sigil and how to create a sigil. And this is a method that I have in his book Zoskia, and that I use quite often when I try to fill my lines with like spiritual energy and spiritual power. It's a very, very convenient way to work. But I won't hide also the fact that sometimes those symbols carry a lot of energy and a lot of sincerity, but sometimes when the band is very uninspiring and when their message is very shallow and just try to look cool and to appear being like a spiritual band while inside there is just like void and shallow substance, then in those cases I just do the same thing. I take symbols and I mash them together and I throw them to their face, and that's fine. Sadly, I sometimes have to do these kind of things because I cannot fill in with substance a band that has no substance. And I must say, sadly, quite a lot of bands contacting me are still bands like void of any spiritual substance. Sometimes the music is good, but when you read the lyrics, it's like, oh my God, Jesus Christ. It's like exhausting to read, like painful and exhausting to read. And, like it's like a 12 years old brat trying to write esoteric lyrics in a pretentious way without knowing shit about anything and just throwing words that sound cool in the air, and this is what you get with a lot of metal bands nowadays in terms of lyrical context, not lyrical substance. So yeah, in that case, well, I just by discouragement, I just like adopt the same strategy as they do and mishmash like a couple of symbols alike all together to create something new, and they're happy with it. But I try to avoid that as much as possible, of course, because the more substance there is in a band, in a project, the more inspired I get, and the more inspired my artwork is, and the happier I am in the end of the day. So but sometimes you cannot really choose all the elements. So well, you have to deal with it.
Hey, you mentioned. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah. Go.
You mentioned the OTO. Are you into ceremonial magic at all? Is that something that you?
No. This is not my thing. I have a cultural interest for occult sciences, but as far as my own personal spiritual faith goes, if I was to be involved in some kind of like rituals or magic, I would make all the elements by myself. I don't believe in anything spiritual that has been written by anyone else but me. It's just like, I'm trying to find a comparison, but yeah, it's just like, jerking off and trying to come by using the fantasies of the other guy.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy, actually.
No, you need your own universe, you need your own vibes, you need your own fantasies, you need like to create your own ritual, and you're not going to ask your neighbor, oh, what turns you on, man? Oh, well, I'm into like fat chicks dressed as pigs. All right, I would jerk off to that today. It doesn't work that way. And I really, really have the same approach when things come to, like being involved in any kind of esoteric spiritual activities for myself.
Yeah, I think that a really good way of approaching that is kind of taking the best out of, having a wide variety of things that you're interested in and kind of pulling things from here and there. And I don't know, I like specifically with symbols and that kind of thing. I think that's an excellent way of communicating ideas, and there's certain power and energy in that kind of stuff. And I think that if you have an intention that you can look at the broader picture and kind of pull these things together into something that's very personal,
Yep.
Well, thank you very much, Valnoir. And, this is...
Yeah, I'm getting hungry, and when I'm hungry, I lose my... it's very difficult for me to focus on anything else but my food. I'm still a very, very primitive person.
Je vois dans ces flots d'invectives, je vois surtout les gens qui boivent, qui mangent, qui dorment, qui font toutes les fonctions humaines, qui sont toutes assez vulgaires. Je dirais qu'ils sont lourds. Et leur esprit est lourd, c'est ça qui me semble surtout. Il n'a jamais cessé d'être lourd. Il y a très peu de légèreté chez l'homme. Il est lourd. Et alors maintenant, il est extraordinaire de lourdeur. L'alcool, l'ambition, la politique le rendent lourd, encore plus lourd, infirme. Il pèse, la lourdeur les rend infirmes. Par conséquent, on peut se méfier d'eux. Ils sont pas tatoués. Oh oui, ils sont pas tatoués. Et pour activer encore la lourdeur, ils boivent. Alors quand ils boivent, c'est des marteaux pilons. C'est effrayant.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of Metal Matters, a Gimme Radio weekly podcast. Tune in next week and see what we have in store for you. The show is available on all streaming platforms, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, etc. Also, be sure to check out Gimme Radio, streaming on the web, iOS, or Android, for one of the best metal communities, exclusive merch, interviews with artists, and so much more. I'll catch you guys next week. Take care.